What's happening, people? Shay here, Uneven Balance. Hope you guys are well. So, as my wife likes to say, we are going back in the day. Back in the day tonight. Back to the 1990s, where me and Rajiv probably had a bit more hair on each other. But anyway, we are discussing tonight another trip down memory lane. As I said before, me, Rajiv Radhakrishnan, once again, doing our thing. Just reminiscing about, I'd say, can't really say good times, can we? But almost feels like I wish we had the two people in question discussing tonight back in the test team. So we are discussing England legends, Michael Atherton and Alex Stewart, obviously former England captains and stalwarts of the England test team in particular during the 90s and the late 80s as well. Obviously, Rajiv has been wanting to talk about this for quite some time. We've got this series going now. We've got quite a few more topics in the pipeline, which has been very enjoyable the next few months. Anyway, as I always say, the floor is yours, Rajiv. I know you've got quite a large agenda to get through. So, yeah, you take it away, mate.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you for the introduction. And, great to be back here after the slightly disappointing conclusion to the England-India series. But there we go. That's what COVID is. Focusing on the Atherton and Stewart era, which was pretty much the 1990s. And it's interesting that when we look at English cricket, that I've noticed, you always get sort of a pair of players that are bracketed together, which sort of define that era. So just before Atherton and Stewart, it was probably the Gower Botham era from the 1980s. For whatever reason, Gooch, Gadding and Alan Lamb didn't fit into a pairing. It was the Gower Botham 80s. 1990s, definitely Atherton and Stewart, and then after that it was the Vaughan and Trescothick era. So that was just an interesting thing. And I grew up watching Atherton and Stewart as they developed their career. I remember their debuts, and I remember them finishing off, and they were pretty much in parallel. But they were actually quite contrasting characters, and they both made their debut when England were in turmoil. So Atherton, despite being 5 years younger than Alex Stewart, he made his debut as a 21-year-old in the debacle of the 1989 Ashes series. He came in, and he probably wouldn't have made his debut then if it weren't for the South African Rebel Tour that an England 11 went on. So England lost probably half their side, and therefore the selectors had no choice but to pick some players who probably wouldn't have made it at that stage so early in their careers. And Atherton was one of them, fresh out of university, and had only been playing 2 years of first-class cricket. And at the age of 21, made his debut. He got a duck, but he showed some promise in the second innings. He got 47. And what's interesting is even at that age, he was already being considered as captaincy material. He hadn't established himself in the side, obviously, but because he was Cambridge educated, captain Cambridge, he was obviously considered perhaps by the MCC as the right kind of person to lead England empire and all that kind of stuff. But for that winter series for the West Indies, and probably considering that, they probably protected him and didn't take him to the West Indies. He went on an A tour, the first of its kind, and he was a vice captain to Mark Nicholas, if I remember. He definitely went on the A tour, and I'm fairly certain he was vice captain. And the full England side, now under Graham Gooch, went to the West Indies, and Alex Stewart made his debut there, alongside Naz Hussain in the same test. The thing with Alex Stewart, he was nearly 27 now, and he made his debut. And if you look at most England cricketers from sort of that period, that was the first time he had ever actually played any national representative cricket. Was his England debut. He had not played England under 19, England A. I know those teams hadn't really been established in that era, but he never, I don't think, even played like South of England or any kind of representative things. And he'd been playing county cricket for 8 years already, shown some promise, but he was averaging in the mid to late 30s, which in county cricket was, it was a fairly good thing to do in that era. And his wicket-keeping probably wasn't well known then, but he went as the second keeper. And then let's not forget, he had the nepotism jibes thrown at him because his dad, Mickey Stewart, was the England manager at the time. But there wasn't really much expected of Alex Stewart. No one had talked him up like the way Graham Hick was. the following year when he made his England debut. So to be honest, I think he was quite lucky that he didn't have any of the pressures. So anyway, you went to the West Indies in 1990. Didn't have a great series, but then again, apart from Alan Lamb and Robin Smith, none of the batsmen really kicked on. And then come the summer of 1990, now Atherton makes his returns to the Test fold and gets a huge 100 at Edgbaston, gets 150. He's now 22, and he seems to be the established opener with Graham Gooch, and he has a great summer, as did most batsmen in that period. Alex Stewart did play in the New Zealand series. He got a 50, didn't do much, but anyway, Atherton and Stewart are now both taken to Australia in the following winter, the Ashes tour. And now they're starting to establish themselves as players and also as potential leaders. Alan Lamb is vice captain, but obviously he's aging, and Graham Gooch is already in his late 30s. He would captain on a bit more, but they're looking for someone more young to take the reins forward. They didn't have a successful Ashes series. Atherton did get 100, a very slow 100. And then Alex Stewart made a classy 91. I remember that. And he also got a 70. But then we saw the issues that were going to start plaguing English cricket for the next decade. England, after the first 3 Test matches, think we need to play an extra bowler or an extra batsman. Well, this is what we're going to start doing. We're going to make Alex Stewart keep wicket. We're going to drop Jack Russell, even though he's the best keeper in the country, probably in the world. But Jack Russell, his batting isn't in the same league as Alex Stewart's. But on the flip side, Alex Stewart's keeping at the time wasn't in the same league as Jack Russell, and probably never was. So we saw the first issue of this. So Alex Stewart takes the gloves for the last 2 Test matches, and that now is going to be an issue throughout the 1990s. And it's really interesting because Alex Stewart and Jack Russell are the same age. And at some point during Alex Stewart's time as a youngster, he decided to take up keeping, and it's probably caused more problems for England than it did solve. And I'll just bring a bit of a side point on there. Everyone talks, about Adam Gilchrist revolutionising, the keeper batsman role. But you know what? Alex Stewart was before his time, and it was Alex Stewart who did it. And it's also caused, I think, problems, if I just go off on a slight tangent, caused problems throughout the world, where any batsman now is trying to emulate that and just trying to add a string to their bow to keep them in the side and just take up keeping. And as a result of this, the standard of wicket keeping has dropped dramatically. And you had the ridiculous thing of Rahul Dravid keeping wicket in the 2003 World Cup. You've had Sri Lanka, who have they've had 4 or 5 wicket keepers in the same side as they swap gloves between themselves. Even England now, you look at Johnny Bairstow, Joss Butler. I think Ollie Pope can keep wicket.
Yeah.
So
he has temporarily in New Zealand. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of wickets, and I'm not convinced that's a good thing. That they're doing it for ulterior motives. You can't blame them, just to add another string to their bow to get in the side. So that role of the specialist wicket keeper, the one who can take the stumps in, like Ian Healy, those traditional wicket keepers, Rodney Marsh, who are so important. You ask any bowler, they would want these guys there, and they can affect a stumping, which would stop Brian Lara scoring 300. So they're saving 250 runs rather than a wicketkeeper who can bat a lot better and score probably 20 or 30 runs more than the specialist keeper. So it doesn't add up. But anyway, that's just the way that the game has gone. As a
I think it's probably almost like a continued evolution of the importance of the keeper. Like I feel like now, I think Gilchrist started a trend where he bats at 7 and can average 40 plus. You saw Simon Carr, people like that. Simon Carr really was a wonderful batsman by himself. He didn't need to take the gloves. Obviously, you saw his averages differ massively, but he still has a very respectable average, even as a keeper. But I think, like you said, because people wanted that all-rounder role, you've seen the keeper almost being the person who's been a sacrificial lamb in that instance, where they're looking to bounce side with the additional batsman or additional bowler. I feel like the day of just a specialist keeper of batting at 7 or 8 and averaging 28 to 32 is long gone.
It is.
It's long gone. It's finished. I mean, Tim Payne, to me, probably one of the few people. I remember Shane Dowrich for West Indies been dropped now, but like him, you would say along the lines of more of a specialist keeper. But England is still guilty of it now, even with Alex Stewart from 20 years ago. They're still guilty now about chucking people like Bairstow and Butler, in the top 5, top 6, and taking the gloves. So it is a problem.
It is an issue, and in fact, the success of it in that early 90s period was that if you looked at Alex Stewart's average as a wicketkeeper batsman, it was actually less than Jack Russell was as a wicketkeeper. So they weren't.
That's
actually
interesting. I know that. That's interesting.
It did change later, but at the beginning when it was happening, that's what it was, and that was I guess you could call it irony of the situation. So the night, and then Atherton's other string to his bow was that he bowled a bit of leg spin, and he actually was fairly successful. I think he got about 50 first-class wickets, but he had to stop it because of his back issues. So both of them had this, extra little thing to them. Alex Stewart's obviously repertoire was a bit stronger with his keeping, much better than Atherton's leg spin bowling. He'll be happy to admit that. So now that the 90s developing, Graham Gooch coming towards the end of his career, Alan Lamb, also old as vice-captain, is removed as vice-captain for the 1991 home series, and Atherton takes over as vice-captain. And I was 12 now.
Against the Windies.
Against the Windies. Generally, in those days, you didn't have a home vice-captain. They were only appointed on tours. But unofficially, Atherton was at home in 1991, the unofficial vice-captain. I don't think it was announced or anything, but I do know that from reading the autobiographies, etc. But in those days, vice-captains were only appointed on tours. So anyway, Alan Lamb understandably lost it. I wouldn't have gone for Atherton. I wouldn't have gone for Stewart either, because at that time they weren't established players. And yet, someone like Robin Smith was ignored, a bit like Graham Thorpe. These guys, for some reason, the Robin Smiths, Graham Thorpes, even though they're better players and established in the side, they were never given sort of the leadership roles. But that's outside of the scope of this discussion. So Atherton and Stewart sort of vying for that role, and then the next winter they go to the World Cup, but Atherton had a dreadful series against the West Indies, and coupled with a back injury, he didn't go on that tour, and they made Alex Stewart vice-captain for that winter tour. And what's interesting is Alex Stewart didn't play at all in the preceding summer against the West Indies. He was lucky. Lucky maybe a bit unfair on him, but he got 100 in the final test in the one-off against Sri Lanka, which, let's face it, in 1991, Sri Lanka weren't going to trouble too many players, too many teams. And then he was made vice-captain that winter. So he's only been around for 18 months, and he's suddenly vice-captain of England. And for the last 8 years before that, he was just milling around in county cricket and not setting the world alight. But life's
He's
like
5 years old, isn't he? 5 years older than Atherton.
And he's 5 years older than Atherton. Yes, Atherton is 1968, Alex Stewart 1963.
63, yeah.
So Alex Stewart makes his debut extremely late, pretty much immediately gets the vice-captaincy. They go on that tour to New Zealand before the World Cup. They easily beat New Zealand. And Alex Stewart actually captains in an ODI for the first time while Graham Gooch is playing. They just gave him the captaincy for one match just to get a bit of experience. And then the World Cup was successful. They got to the final, nothing wrong in that. And shame that they lost. And it's interesting now, Alex Stewart also gets 2 centuries in New Zealand. And if you think about it, all the hype in the last 18 months had been about Graham Hick, the new great white hope of English cricket. He struggled against the West Indies, and he continued to struggle throughout his career. And here Alex Stewart comes in, he gets a century against Sri Lanka, 2 in New Zealand in the 3 Test series, and then he's also starting to captain the side in ODI cricket. And then 1992, against a powerful attack, Waqar and Wasim, he gets 190 at Edgbaston. Yeah. And now he's got 4 centuries in 5 Test matches, and Graham Hick, where all the attention, and Alex Stewart, I think, benefited with having no pressure. The only thing he had thrown at him, completely unjustified, was the fact that his dad was the manager, but that was never an issue. Mickey Stewart would never pick him just because he's his son, of course not. And Mickey Stewart dropped him as well. So, there was never any kind of suspicions in that era at all, in that area. So Alex Stewart gets that wonderful 190, and then in the second test at Lords, he gets a pair of 50s. England win, an exciting encounter, and Alex Stewart, you can see now how much he loves the pace, taking on Wakar and Wazim, and then Atherton returns to the side next in the summer of '92 against Pakistan. But yet, if you look at it, he's not setting the world alight. He's making these starts. And it's now 3 years of his career, and he hasn't really converted, and he's probably got about 2 or 3 centuries at this stage. And then what's sort of a defining moment, I think, between Atherton and Stewart, it was probably bubbling under the surface, is that winter tour to India. Now, 92-93, which they did a feature on Sky Sports recently. Yeah. Now, there was a lot of things surrounding that tour from the moment they took off without David Gower or Jack Russell, but we're not going to talk about that. So they go on that tour, and Atherton is sidelined. And if you look at Atherton's career, 115 test matches, he has played in that career, 115 test matches in 12 years. He played 1 test match in India, which is shocking to think about it now. Someone who plays over 100 test matches and you say he's only played 1 in India. That's unheard of in this era. But that's exactly what his career is. He played 1 test match.
But that was down to the clouds of India at the time. There wasn't like the same level of obviously financial reward, etc. But the razzmatazz and the luxury of going into it's 20 years ago.
20 years ago, yeah.
Ultimately, cricket was run still by Australia and England.
Exactly.
You know, we've got obviously Tush, who's on the chat, and Tush, good to see you back, mate, because you haven't been here for a while. I know we've used to come on the previous streams. You left just a little comment here, which I'll let Rajiv kind of pick up on. Obviously, Tush has mentioned about Alan Knott, probably the first proper wicketkeeper batsman, before Jack Russell. Averaging 33 in 95 test matches. Yeah, he was obviously, again, the Mike Brealey mode of a pure, very much a keeper first, batsman second. Where I think the issue we have at the moment is it's batsman first, keeper second. I think that's why England have an issue with Ben Foakes, because he's not seemed strong enough as a batsman, even though he's a really good keeper. And that's, I think, the conundrum they're facing still now. The reality is they should probably persevere with Ben Foakes at 7 for the past 3 years. But as soon as they were able to drop him when he flopped in, when he's in 2019, he got rid of him straight away, didn't he? I mean, he did so well, man the series in Sri Lanka in 2018. Then 2019 here, he didn't do well in the West Indies, and he was gone. But you've seen Josh Butler be given chant after chant after chant after chant. It's and
it just adds more confusion. Alan Knott averaged 33 when 33 in that era did mean something. 33 today, actually, it's probably gone the other way. We've probably gone back to that kind of era where the averages are dropping so much now because of this diet of T20. But wicketkeepers and even number 11 batsmen are expected to hold a bat. It's a bit of a strange thing because the argument there is, well, you don't expect the batsman to bowl, so why are you expecting the bowlers to bat? And you don't expect the batsman to keep wicket. So what? But the difference is everyone has to bat in cricket, not everyone has to bowl. So that argument is flawed. And therefore, everyone has to hold a bat, which I can understand. And that is the way it goes. And if you look at a lot of series wins, you look at 7, 8, 9, they usually score some valuable runs down there. The Brad Haddins, the Gus Logies, the Jeff Dujons, Wazim Akram. So, you do need that strength in depth there. So they go to that India tour, complete debacle. Atherton is sidelined. There was one match where they made Richard Blakey bat, I think, as high as number 6. He was the second wicketkeeper there. Alex Stewart, who made his debut as captain in Madras after the Prawn Gate, ruled out Graham Gooch and Mike Gadding. Alex Stewart took over as vice captain. Mike Gadding did play in that match, but Graham Gooch didn't. And as Stewart became Test captain for the first time, he was caught short. He only found out, I think, 10 minutes before, so he was basically wearing a T-shirt at the toss, something Alex Stewart you wouldn't associate with because he's always very well presented, unlike Atherton, who's a little bit more scruffy. He shouldn't have. Atherton should have played in that match. He didn't. And then in the next test, the final one at Mumbai, the press made it a huge mountain out of this. Atherton and Stewart batting at the crease, both vying for the captaincy. Graham Gooch now approaching 40, and both past and present vice captains in the side. And Alex Stewart hit the ball into the covers, or to point rather, cover point, called for a run. Atherton declined, and they were both up in arms, arguing at the end of at one side of the pitch. And it was the end of a very, very poor tour. I think tempers were short, and the press made a big thing saying, "Oh, look, Atherton's been sidelined in this series. This is only Test match. They're both vying for the captaincy. North of England, south of England, public school boy, private school boy, university graduate, Cambridge. The other guy, Alex Stewart, certainly didn't go to university. So they made a huge thing about this, and then everyone had a poor run on that tour except Graham Hick. He made some runs, and did Chris Lewis, but." So the Ashes come 1993, and they're at home now, and it's a debacle. And after the fourth test, Graham Gooch resigns, and now who's going to captain? And the candidates were actually Mike Gatting. Were they going to bring him back at the age of 36? Alex Stewart and Mike Atherton. And I think Alex Stewart's role as a wicketkeeper actually probably prevented him from getting the captaincy, because that just confused the issue. How can you combine being one of the specialist batsmen, captaining and keeping wicket? So he lost out. They didn't want to go back to Mike Gatting, probably because of age and his colourful history in the job. So they went for someone new and fresh, and Atherton was 25, had played 4 years of Test cricket, but in reality, probably only 2 years with injuries, etc. Still averaging in the 30s, but they thought probably early 30s at that stage, and they thought, we're going to go with this guy Cambridge and all that kind of jazz. I probably wouldn't have, because for me you've got to be worth your place in the side, but they went with him, and he went on to have the most fruitful time as a batsman. Atherton's record as a captain from about 93 to 96, in that 3-year period out of his 12-year career, which I'll come back to in a second, he scored heavily. While his batting, he held that team together. His batting supported England while they went from one failure to another. There were pockets of success, but generally not. And Alex Stewart was his vice captain. He was vice captain to Gooch for 2 years, and Alex Stewart faithfully served Atherton for 3 tours up until 1996. When he was replaced, not because of performance, but because of age. But I'll come back to that in a second. Anyway, so Atherton and Stewart now are starting to open the batting together, because Graham Gooch now takes the winter off to the West Indies. Atherton and Stewart, the hierarchy, open the batting, captain and vice captain. And I think, they both perform well in the West Indies, and they're both scoring sort of similar runs, number of centuries, and both, competing well. And probably, I wouldn't say the 2 best batsmen in the side. I don't think they were. I would say Robin Smith and Graham Thorpe were better. But Atherton was facing the new ball against serious pace, and carried on. But then he resigned 4 years later, in 1998, after another disappointing tour of the West Indies, and Alex Stewart took over. But before I go on to Alex Stewart's reign as captain, I'd just like to sort of highlight some of the my most memorable moments of those careers in that period. I'll say Atherton falling over on 99 at Lords. I was at the game. I was 14. He was run out. Mike Gatting stopped him, called no, and sent him back. And Atherton tripped and fell over on 99. And we can laugh about it now. So Atherton never got onto the honours board for Test matches. He did for ODIs, and they've put an ODI honours board now. And when I met Atherton actually at a function, I said to him, that's probably why you didn't pick Mike Gatting to tour the West Indies, because he ruined you of that. He ruined your chances of that 100. And he said, yeah, that was my devious plan to do that. That was my and my other favourite is him taking on Alan Donald in 1998 at Trent Bridge.
Yeah. Iconic,
yeah,
like absolutely.
23
years old, also talking about it,
Yeah, exactly. And it was, and the funny thing is that Atherton, the red mark on the glove, which clearly proved that he was out, he actually signed it and gave it to Donald at the end of the Test match. So nice touch there. But yeah, it was hostile. And Atherton took it on and scored 98 not out. One of the great innings. And for me, Alex Stewart,
Stewart as well. He obviously made the 185, didn't he, in Joburg 2.5 years before?
Yeah,
Do you know
I did
anything?
forget about that. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I can't believe I forgot something as iconic and as important as that. I'm not sure. I'm obviously getting old. But yeah, the 185 in Johannesburg, he batted throughout the whole day, was in the zone, and played, what we would call a captain's innings, along with Jack
saved
Russell.
the game from memory. He saved the game,
Saved
didn't
the
he?
game, yeah. I don't know how many hours. And interestingly, he was dropped on 99. And if that catch had been taken, which I think was fairly simple by Gary Kirsten at short leg, I think he would have been the first man and only person to have been out for 99 on 3 separate occasions. And then we have to talk about the lows as well during that period. Let's not forget the ball tampering allegations.
Of course, yeah.
And I was at that match as well. I was there on the Thursday and on the Sunday, but not the day that he was filmed taking. That was on the Saturday. That's an interesting thing because I wrote about that in my cricket book. And what it is he put the dirt in his pocket and then applied it to the ball. Now, you see, in that era, lots of people would put their hand on the pitch, and they still do. They rub their hand on the pitch, and then they hold the ball to grip it better. So what Atherton did, if you look at it, he just took the dirt from the pitch, stuck it in his pocket, and then applied it. So it's not too different to anyone else applying dirt. And I think the rules were slightly different then. He wasn't altering the ball. He was preserving the ball's dryness, which I think we need to really understand that. So I don't think he was cheating. He just wasn't accurate in what he said to the match referee at the end of day's play. They said, "Did you have anything?" He said, "No." Why he said no, I don't know. Because technically he didn't do anything wrong. Anyway, it was a pretty harsh time for him. But he came back and scored that second 99 at Headingley. He got a rousing applause from the crowd and battled hard with a great 99 and was caught in bowled by Craig McMillan. And he was fined again at the end of that summer for dissent. And then he went to the Ashes in 94, 95. Again, England lost. And while this is all happening and Atherton's in the the forefront, Alex Stewart is serving as a very good lieutenant. He's doing everything as asked for and being the consummate professional that he is. And I called him in my book, as I said, I called him the 3 2s. Why do I say that? Well, he was second in the batting order, he was the vice captain, and he was the second wicketkeeper. So he was fulfilling these deputy roles.
I'm looking at his batting averages in the 3 years from 93 to 96.
Absolutely. I would say 45 or 46, maybe more.
Well, he averaged 13.93 at the end. So he averaged 49 in 94, then 13.95 and 61 in 96.
Yeah.
And also, you're absolutely very right about Michael Atherton, his captaincy reign, because 93 averaged 38, 94, 49, 95, 49. Then a drop off, then he came back in 97 with 40, 42 average. But, the 3 years of 39, 49, 49 against an average of 37. So, he by far exceeds what he did overall as a test player when he was captain.
Yeah, a bit like Graham Gooch. I mean, very much like Graham Gooch. Graham Gooch even more pronounced. But yeah, and as I say, Alex Stewart performing as a worthy lieutenant. And my highlights for me with him is that 1994, the 200s in Barbados. England were bowled out for 46 at Trinidad against Ambrose. And it was funny, when they came out to play in the Barbados test, which was the 4th test after that debacle, Atherton Stewart got to 46 opening stand, and there was lots of cheering from the crowd, from the England supporters, because a lot of English people go to Barbados to watch cricket. And apparently Atherton was like, "Well, why are they all cheering? Well, what's the reason?" And Stewart was saying, no, it's because we got to 46, and that's why. They didn't actually know, well, Atherton didn't understand why. Anyway, Alex Stewart went on to get 200s in that test, and England won in Barbados. No team had done that for 60-odd years. Again, indicative of their inconsistency in that era, to get humbled out for 46 and then go on and win at Barbados, where no one has won for decades. And then my other special memory of Alex Stewart is 1996. Now, he'd been dropped over the winter when they came back after that South Africa tour. And it's really interesting how luck plays a role here. And I remember thinking just before that home season in 1996, after Alex Stewart struggled on that winter tour to South Africa. And then I say struggled according to his standards. He was still doing, fairly okay. Yeah. And they picked Nick Knight to make his not to make his debut, but to return after he played in the West Indies against the West Indies the previous summer. So Knight and Atherton were opening, and then for the second test at Lords, from what I remember, Nick Knight had picked up an injury and Alex Stewart was on standby. And people were thinking, well, why are you putting a 33-year-old on standby if Nick Knight gets injured? Bring in another youngster. But they didn't. And I thought, you know what, Alex Stewart's only 33. That's okay. And Nick Knight didn't play. He got injured. Alex Stewart came in. He got a 50. And then in the third test, he scored more runs and he kept scoring more and more. And then he got this wonderful 160 against Waqar and Wazim. Now Pakistan had arrived at Headingley. And I remember I'd been away and I came home and I watched this century he got. And the joy that he showed when getting it, you could see that this guy had adversity. He was having some personal issues. If I remember correctly, his wife had been in hospital. So kind of struggled at home and not scoring runs out of the side. And yet he comes out, culminates, gets lots of 50s, and then he culminates in getting a massive 100 at Headingley against Waqar and Wazim. Now, these are high-class bowlers. And Alex Stewart does a great job there. And then by the Oval Test, guess what? He's back keeping wicket. So he wasn't even in the side, and now he's suddenly back in, opening and keeping wicket and doing everything, probably driving the bus as well. And now he's back in, re-cemented his place, hadn't been dropped for 5 years. And then they go to New Zealand and Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was a bit of a disaster. And probably one of the low points here was Alex Stewart. I remember this. There was a run chase in Zimbabwe. I can't remember I'm guessing it was Harare. I'm assuming it is. And he and his streak had a bit of an argy-bargy, and Alex Stewart nearly could have been done for obstructing field, but it was covered up and not covered up. It was quickly peace was restored and they kissed and made up. And then so Zimbabwe, they didn't actually win. It was getting a bit embarrassing, but they won in New Zealand, and then they came back and the Ashes series was on again. And now we start to see Atherton's form as a batsman falling away quite drastically now. And Alex Stewart still maintaining himself. They go to the West Indies after another Ashes loss. Atherton didn't want to captain. He wanted to resign. And in the midst of this, Nazar Hussain has now become England vice captain, taking it away from Alex Stewart. And they come back after the disaster of the 1998 West Indies tour, and we need a new captain. And it's between Stewart and Hussain, because Atherton, after 5 years and not missing a single test as captain, has resigned. And they go for Alex Stewart. And the first thing they had to decide is what role is he going to play. They said he'll bat at 4 and keep wicket. And Alex Stewart, when you watch him captain, he loved it. He loved all the attention. He lapped it up. He liked to be seen in charge, giving like these speeches, and he really puffed out his chest, and that's just a difference in the characters between Atherton and Stewart. The way one was so desperate to promote himself as captain, be vocal, and Atherton a little bit more reluctant, a bit more shy. I wouldn't say shy, but just didn't give as much energy as there. And I said probably reflective even in their batting. You see Alex Stewart come out to bat. He's twisting the bat in his hand, rolling it around. Yeah. Atherton is a little bit, so. And even in my interactions,
I always feel it's almost like the alpha and the beta a little bit with those two. Especially with Stewart, very much like I feel like it's very much an alpha male. He's always been known to be a bit of a gym rat, even during his playing days. Mm-hmm. Very healthy, consistent. It was like I was confused with Dominic Court then, but I remember his diet was also very regimented, very clean living. Very little alcohol, if any at all, actually. But I remember he was always known to be in the gym. That's why he looks the way he looks now, almost 60 years old. But like I said, chest puffed out, had a lot of physical conversations. I think about Sangakkara, as it around 2000. Mahanama, was it? Mahanama of Sri Lanka.
Ranatunga, he barged him, and yeah.
But he always had physical, like you mentioned, he streak. Whereas Atherton was never that way. I mean, Atherton's body language, I think 98 Trent Bridge against Donald was very aggressive through body language, but we never towards physical. Where I always felt like Alex Stewart, you could get into a punch up with a guy. You know what I mean? Well, his approach to his game was almost like that, was swashbuckling at times. It was aggressive. You know what I mean? So I think they're very different people. If you listen to him now interview, I felt sorry. So I've heard a lot of Stewart interviews. The way he talks, he's got a guy who just takes no shit. But yeah.
No, they are chalk and cheese. They're very, very different.
That's why I call it chalk and cheese in this video, because they don't seem to me as two guys who would, after retire, would share a beer consistently and be good friends. I don't see that. I don't see the synergy between the two of them.
Well, Atherton mentioned that in his autobiography. He says there just wasn't any common ground there between the two of them. And it was a working relationship. I don't think they do hang out outside of that, which is fine. At the end of the day, you don't have to be friends with everyone and decide. But you would think captain and vice captain opening the batting together, some kind of relationship would have developed, but there just wasn't anything there. And just touching on the sort of the characters there, I've met both of them at various functions, and I've noticed that with Atherton, he does give a bit of a shrug of the shoulders, which could be conceived as a bit of arrogance. There's no warmth when you talk to him. There's a bit of dismissiveness, and a bit like Andy Murray when people get, when you see Andy Murray on TV, there's like almost a sneer, like, I'm here playing tennis. I can't be bothered, shrug of the shoulder. Yeah, whatever, Subaka. Yeah. That monosyllabic kind of dour kind of feel you get from Andy Murray, who, to be honest, he puts me off tennis. I just don't even want to see him being interviewed. He's just such a miserable guy. And I think Atherton sometimes gives off that vibe. When I've met Alex Stewart, he wants to talk to you. He engages with you. I've met him in function. He'll spend time with you, listen to you, and answer your questions. And he's much more warm, much more engaging. Definitely more personable, and a bit of humor as well. And I think and in 2000, when they both played the first time in history, two people played their 100th Test match at the same time, and that was Old Trafford, year 2000, against the West Indies. And you look at the way Alex Stewart approached that game. He was so proud, and you know what? Good for him. He was really proud that he had played 100, and of course he should be. And he exuded it. He was so happy about it, and he loved the funfair. Atherton was like, he gave us yes, like, yeah, it's 100 tests. Yes, so what? Like a bit of arrogance, a bit of dismissiveness. A bit like Andy Murray. That. I won't use the words I want to describe Andy Murray. We're not talking about tennis here, but that kind of sneering, dismissiveness, contemptuous sort of feel to it, if that's the right word.
I think down to personalities that the plight of the England cricket team in the 90s, especially got to Atherton. It got to him, operating under the circumstances he had to with Illingworth sample, people like that, as part of the selection committee. I feel like I remember him watched an interview with him back in the 90s, and he said that it was a very average team that he was leading for so long. Yep. And I think obviously his back problems as well was a big issue. Consistently managing that, his back for his entire career. I mean, he was having, at the end of it, was like having injections every day almost on his back to keep him going. It's a guy retired at age 33 years old. He was young.
He was very young.
Yeah. He was young, 33. 2001 Ashes, he packed it in, right? I mean, he failed against with McGrath, and he packed it in.
Yeah,
I think he was just done with it. And I think at that point, you mentioned before about maybe his dour expressions from getting 100 Test matches. I think he'll look back now, 20 years on, with a lot of happiness at the fact he achieved that. But I think at the time, he's been so beat down by the establishment, what he'd gone through. I think that's pretty why. And also coupled with the fact he's a bit of a dour character.
Yeah.
He's a glass half empty, I think, where Stuart's more of a glass half full. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think I know you mentioned the back issues as well, and we have to take that into account. But after that, he lost the captaincy, or he resigned, and that last few years of his career, I did some research on it. From 96 September to the end of his career in 2001 September, he averaged 32. And that's a 5-year period. So that's a huge sample size. And over that same period, Mark Ramprakash averaged 35. And Atherton, I felt, there was a part of it that he was part of the inner circle, and therefore his stats were never as scrutinized as they should have been. And I think he should have been axed a lot earlier. He was averaging mid-20s for a lot of series after 96. And if you look at the scores, I'm probably being a bit harsh here, he got a lot of ducks. Some, I think about 25. And for an opening batsman to be getting that, a specialist batsman, approaching, 25 to 30 ducks, it's just incredible.
His average, 98, 28 average, 1999, 27. 2000, he averaged 49, 2000.
Okay.
Interesting, he's in Zimbabwe, and then averaged 23 in his final year.
Yeah, exactly. So it was time he went, and I remember one poor memory I have of him. It was 1999 after the World Cup finished and England exited before the second stage, and everyone was baying for blood. And Atherton didn't play in the World Cup because he was back injury, and he came back in the Old Trafford for the Old Trafford Test when the New Zealand stayed on for the Test series. It was Old Trafford, and it was grim and dull. And I remember he scored 11 runs in 135 minutes. He stood out there for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I tell you, he laboured over those 11 runs. That's what Wisden recorded it as. And that's how I remember it. And we were already suffering from the hangover of the World Cup. And this just made the headache worse. And I can't see how there is any value of him facing that number of deliveries and getting 11 runs to wait for the bowlers to tire. That's what he said. And he's like, you have not achieved anything when we're trying to make it entertaining and, and Alex Stewart wouldn't have done that. He went out there, he was looking to score, looking for opportunities, attack within reason. And Atherton just stood there, block. And it was dull. He wasn't good as a shop window of the game, I'm afraid. And I'm probably being a bit too critical of him. He's a great commentator now, but anyway, so Alex Stewart takes over in 1998, and guess what? Immediate success. They beat South Africa
2-1, yeah.
2-1, and Atherton gets that 98. He has a good series as well. He averages 45. Alex Stewart at number 4 is averaging 50 in that series. And they go to Australia with a lot of hope. But the series was controversial at the end of it. We will come back to that. But at the beginning, England could easily have made it 2-2. There was an third umpiring glitch with the TV where Michael Slater should have been given run out. And the Melbourne Test, Alex Stewart scored 100, and he gave up the gloves for that test, and England won handsomely by 12 runs. Very exciting match. And they could have won the 5th test. It could have been so easily 2-2. And then the controversy that we were just discussing, the World Series happens and Sri Lanka are the 3rd team, and he has a go at Ranatunga because Ranatunga in that match earlier on had taken the team off after Murali with no ball. And Alex Stewart, when Ranatunga came out to bat, said, your conduct today as an international captain has been absolutely shocking. But whether that's right or wrong, he then goes and barges Roshan Mahanama, who did barge Darren Gough. Let's not forget that. But it seemed a bit...
It was I remember this.
Yeah, so Mahanama is no saint, but Alex Stewart talking about Ranatunga's captaincy when he's just barged another player. And I wrote in my book, and I sent it to Alex Stewart, so I hope he's read it. I said that 9 years before that, he was at the crease when Viv Richards did that rain dance and intimidated the umpire to give out Rob Bailey. So I said in the book, I said, well, you barged Roshan Mahanama, who's probably about 5'3". How come you didn't barge Viv Richards? What's the difference? Is there a reason you didn't take on Viv Richards? Why didn't you elbow him? You chose your opponent well. So I don't know if you read that bit in the book. But anyway, so Alex Stewart did that. And then they come back for the World Cup in 99. Atherton's injured, pulls out of the World Cup. And England don't do too badly, but everyone makes a meal out of it. And then Alex Stewart, only been appointed captain like in the last 18 months, is suddenly being sacked and Nazar Hussain takes over. I think it was a very harsh axing for someone who had done so well the previous summer and, lost Australia, but so did every other captain in that era. And it could so easily have been 2-2. Anyway, Alex Stewart, very upset at losing the captaincy. And then he would intermittently captain England when Nazar Hussain got injured and be fairly successful. And then Atherton comes back in the side, has a reasonable time, but then he leaves in 2001. And it's interesting how Atherton retired and Alex Stewart retired 2 years later, which again, I think is indicative of their characters. Atherton didn't announce it. There were rumours and it was quite obvious he was, but there wasn't any fanfare. Alex Stewart announced it at the beginning of his last series. So in 2003, he's 40 now, and he had done it. Now, the timing, you can tell a lot about a person of when he announces his retirement. Steve Ward did it at the beginning of that India series, and you saw the amount of attention and fanfare, and the marketing men made a big deal of it. And every match he went to, every venue he went to, it was like a little celebration of his career. and it took away the focus of the team's objective, which was to beat India. And one example, I'll use that Steve Waugh. They were clapping Steve Waugh coming out to bat, and they had forgotten almost to clap the batsman who had scored 100. I can't remember his name. Returning to the pavilion, they'd forgotten about his efforts, and it's all about Steve Waugh. And again, Alex Stewart, by doing that, he got an applause at every ground, and it was like a huge funfair. The last test, everyone, his whole family came, and he made a big song and dance with it. And for me, I think there must be a policy put in place that if you decide to finish your series, you do not make it public. And if you do, then you finish your test match then. That's it, your career is done. Because it takes away the focus. And I think it does say a lot when about a person and a player and the timing of their retirement of when they say that. Anyway, so as Stewart finished in 03, there was a bit more thing with Alex Stewart, controversy-wise, the match-fixing allegations, but absolute rubbish. He had nothing to do with that. And then also, at the end of the Ashes 02-03, he looked like, people say he knows his stats, and he wanted to average 40, and he didn't take the strike and let Andy Caddick, I think it was, take the strike in order for him to have a not out and their average 40. And as I was saying, mentioned that in his autobiography, saying, I don't understand why he let Caddick take Brett Leon when he was a specialist batsman. Was he doing it for his average? Anyway,
he finished on 39.55, didn't he?
He did, and the thing about Alex Stewart is, again, criticism here is he knows his stats, but he likes to give the impression he doesn't. If you listen to him on TMS, when he talks, every single sentence he says, he'll say it like this. He'll say, oh, you know what? In the 1993, I was playing with Peter Such and he got 6 wickets. But you know what? I'm not sure if it's 93 or it's 1992. Let me think. He's desperate to show that he doesn't remember. It's so obvious that he knows what it is, but he wants to give that impression that he can't remember. Now, why he does that, I don't know. And just listen, for the viewers out there, listen to him on the radio every single time. It irritates me so much because Alex Stewart knows his numbers and stats. He pretends not to know. Now, that is a psychological condition that, people want to pretend that they don't remember something because it might make them look sad or a bit of an anorak, a bit like me, really. But I have no embarrassment in saying I know every statistic from Wimbledon. I can tell you who won from 1975 to 2000 and every finalist. I don't see why I have to pretend and say, oh, was it Pete Sampras? Or, and pretend that I'm not that sad, which I clearly am. But Alex Stewart, he has this condition. And honestly, listen to TMS next summer and you will know what I'm talking about. And I want all the viewers to know that. He'll say, oh, Raylingworth captain did that here, but was it that, or whatever. And it's like, the answer. Just don't pretend you don't. It's just pathetic. But anyway, that's one of his character flaws. We all have character flaws. Not me, though. Clearly not. He does that. And another thing negative there on Atherton is when he's so they've gone on 2 different sort of paths after retiring. Alex Stewart become head of cricket at Surrey. He's done a great job there. Made some great signings. Graham Smith, Sangakkara, Hamish Hamler, and Surrey have gone from strength to strength. And he's also fostered and produced players for the national side. Ollie Pope, his latest one, great find for England. And he also brought Murali in to Surrey.
There's been a conveyor belt from Surrey to England.
He's done brilliantly. And
Collins and everything, yeah.
Yeah, and so he does that part-time commentary for TMS. And Atherton has gone on to sort of the more glittering role of Sky commentator. And if you look at the people who've retired and what direction they take, it's interesting that the ones who came from probably more affluent backgrounds, the Gowers, the Athertons, the Nazir Hussains, who went to university, both of them may be an exception here. They go on and do the more high-profile, glittering, money-earning things, and the workhorses. The Gattings, the Gooches, the Alex Stewarts, they go and shift into the more coaching arena. A bit like Mark Ramprakash, a bit like Graham Thorpe. But the high-profile players in their days, both of them would be obviously high-profile. They go on and do the more glamorous roles there. But I mean, each to his own. And Graham Gooch, I think, loves being in that coaching sphere, as is Alex Stewart, and Atherton and Gower like being in the comfort of Sky Sports and flying first class to all these destinations. They're both, and their careers now.
If you look at, for example, I mean, listen, I think David Lloyd kind of contradicts what I'm about to say, but in particular, that's Hussein and Mike Allerton. To me, well, I know for a fact that's Hussein. I've read also both autobiographies, Opening Up and Playing with Fire.
Yep.
I remember that Hussein's autobiography. He's extremely tense, uptight individual, and he stressed, and he was so his idiosyncrasies over cricket, and it's just the levels of stress he had, anxiety over playing the game. I think that's why he's probably avoided the coaching role. I think the same thing with Allerton. I think to getting back to the hard yakka, to coin a cricket phrase, of coaching, again, it can't even at county level. I don't think Allerton and Hussein are cut out for that, because they're also not really people. They're not a people person. Neither of them.
No,
I would say, and you have to have that element of coaching or even director of cricket. For example, like with Alex Stewart, to be in those kind of roles, you have to have a personable traits about you, and to know when to put your arm around someone's shoulder or to give them the kind of the hairdryer treatment. I don't think Allerton and Hussein fit into that mold. I don't think they'd be good coaches, to be honest with you. I don't think it'd be fun to be coached by Nasser Hussain. I really don't. Old Mike Allerton, but they had very good cricket brains, especially Atherton. I think that they did excellent punditry work, but I think that's where it stops. I think David Lloyd's doing a bit of fun. He coached England, obviously. He's very much a glass off full kind of guy, jovial, funny character. Everyone loves him, and he's a good pundit as well. But I think he's also part of the Sky team for the comedic element, as much as he is for his analysis.
And
that's why I think,
light-hearted humour. But going back to that, Atherton, the thing is, Mike Atherton, obviously very insightful, knows the game inside out. But sometimes I actually can't hear what he's saying. His volume just drops when he's having a sentence. He'll speak, and then it just goes quiet, and it comes into a little mumble. So it's a bit frustrating that someone who's got so much valuable things to say, you sometimes can't actually hear him. So. But I think they both had good, solid careers. I think Atherton did play too longer than he ought to have, and I think he was lucky not to have been dropped a few more times. Alex Stewart, his average obviously affected by his keeping, which is fine, and he was a nomad through the batting order. So I'd have Alex Stewart in my all-time England 11 from my era. I wouldn't have Atherton because, as I say, his numbers don't actually stack up that well.
So who would you have for the 90s as your two openers?
Are we talking 1990s and 1999? That's it.
Yeah, let's say just that decade.
If it's that decade, then Graham Gooch, for obvious reasons, his career in the 1990s was incredible. He only played up to 95, only half the decade, but I would definitely keep him. He scored millions of runs, and I'd have him probably opening with Alex Stewart.
Okay.
If we're definitely talking Test cricket, I probably wouldn't have him as keeper. I'd make Jack Russell keep, and then so Gooch Stewart opening, Graham Thorpe in there, Robin Smith in the middle order. Probably now I'm running out of numbers here. I mean, David Gower only played for 2 years in the 1990s, but I feel still.
Do you find space for Hikal Rambakash?
No, not for they. If we're talking a county 11, yeah, but not for a Test series. No, it can't be. Mark Butcher, no. So I'd have Gooch, Alex Stewart, David Gower. Even though
Hussein would be there, I'm sure. Hussein.
Not really. He averaged. He didn't do anything until about 96. And again, if you look carefully, his stats they weren't that amazing.
97, I'll show you 97. He scored 100 right at Edgbaston.
The double 100, yeah, you got double 100.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that's where he kicks on. Obviously, at that point, but maybe not. Maybe it's interesting, isn't it? Like the scratch around for like middle order batsmen in the 90s.
To be honest, I probably would now because I'm thinking you'd have Gooch, Stewart, Gower at 3, and I reiterate, Gower did only play a handful of Test matches in the 1990s. Yeah, and even that it was in and out after he fell out with Graham Gooch, and then. So I'd still have Gower, Thorpe, Robin Smith at 5, or maybe Thorpe at 5, Robin Smith at 4, Gower at 3, and then number 6. It's going to be a struggle, so I might have to go for a Hussein, a Ramprakash, or a Butcher. Maybe, I would be scraping the barrel there. Jack Russell at 7, Cork, Fraser, and Goff as the bowlers, and the spinner. I can't really think of a spinner in the 1990s. Phil Tufnell, I'd have to go for that.
Yeah, very tough. Yeah, you want to go Peter Sarch, you want to go Ian Salisbury. You probably you want to go Min Patel. You definitely got Tufnell.
Yeah, and Peter Sarch, off spinners can only take you so far. I'd rather have a ball turning away from the right hander. So off spinners, unless you're Murali and you've got a wrist spin off spin, then but there's no one there. So the other batsman, 19. I can't think of anyone. I might even have to go and find in fact, even Alan Lamb played up until 1999 too. I'd probably go for him over some of those guys. Even Mike Gatting, I would probably think. It's difficult because it is so thin compared to what there is from the 2000s onwards.
Yeah, definitely. That era. Yeah, it's about 2013, 2014 when they were a formidable side, weren't they? So
sure.
As we covered in the next show, as we'll talk about.
Yeah, we can do that. But I don't want to sound like I've probably been a little bit too negative about Atherton and Stewart in terms of their sort of off the field attitudes and about Alex Stewart pretending not to do it. I mean, that's not a major thing. It's just annoying. It's not a bad character flaw. It's just a bit irritating. I think Atherton, he is cold. I'm not going to go back. He's got a bit of Andy Murray in him. But it's an era that I grew up in that they were struggling and Atherton had a lot on his plate. And as you said, he had his back. The team were being bowled out for 46. There was contract rows when Alex Stewart was captain. There was a lot of things outside the team that didn't let them focus on the cricket, and they had to manage that. Nowadays, they've got enough backroom staff to do that. And, central contracts weren't in place when they were captains. So they were fighting off the counties in order for these guys to be playing for England. They wanted the rest periods. They didn't have it. Nazir Hussain inherited that. He was there when the central contracts came. So he had players with fresh legs at the crease. They weren't, bombarded with the county treadmill. Now it's probably gone the other way. But two pillars of English cricket, very different, chalk and cheese. I wouldn't have Atherton in my side. I'd have Alex Stewart for sure.
Fair enough. I was actually looking now, just saying we were talking there, just to see about Michael Atherton, because didn't he divorce during his England career? Was it afterwards?
No, Alex Stewart. No, and Atherton didn't divorce, no. He married, he may have broken up, had a relationship, but he married De Carey's, who...
the guy from Guyana or something.
Not a guy, a lady she married.
No, but Guyana.
No, this is the guy, sorry. No. With that. No. So he married a lady called De Carey's from Guyana, who is the granddaughter of a West Indian test player from the same name, De Carey's. And now her and Atherton's son, he took that name. Batting for Middlesex and started this year as an 18-year-old. So he's got cricket genes on both sides of the family. And my girlfriend is Guyanese, and she said growing up that name in the Caribbean, in Guyana specifically, was a very famous name. They would probably be with all the socialites and the affluent people. So Atherton did well there. And Alex Stewart, his nephew through his sister, is I think a Surrey Colts player and looking quite good at the moment. And obviously his dad, he's got pedigree there. Yeah. And let's not forget, he was married to Alex Stewart, was brother-in-law to Mark Butcher. Yeah. So got quite a bit of family connection there. And Mark Butcher's dad also played for England. Yeah. But an interesting period. And, he's got, Alex Stewart is the type of guy. I think just another thing on that is when they toured, according to Atherton's autobiography, Atherton would say that what you alluded to before, Atherton wanted to go out and explore the cities, the culture and everything, and take advantage of what tours offer. Alex Stewart, sit by the pool, have a grilled chicken every day, nothing too fancy. And Atherton almost, he didn't want to say it, but he was saying it was almost like, I didn't want to be, I think the term is intellectual snobbery. Like, look at me, I'm going out and experience things. Look at you, sticking in the mud, staying there and having grilled chicken every day. Yeah. But it almost was that. And I think that says, there was no sense of adventure for Alex Stewart to go and take advantage of opportunity. I mean, with me in my previous life as a management consultant, when I used to go and travel all over the world on work, I made sure I went to every local eatery and I didn't care if I had a bad stomach, because I have a bad stomach even on a normal day, and take advantage and do that. But Alex Stewart just wanted to sit by the pool and have his grilled sandwich, chicken sandwich. So each to his own. But again, another indicative example of how different they were and how little there was between them in terms of common ground. But they, as I said, opened together, captain and vice captain together, and shared a lot of some triumphs, but mostly losses during their career.
Fair enough. Good way to end, I think, there, Rajiv. And any more points you want to bring before we wrap up? There's a couple of questions from Tush, if you want to answer them, maybe.
Sure, yeah, let's get some questions.
It's obviously kind of looping back to the wicketkeeper thing. But yeah, I think Tush is still with us. So yeah, I think it's good to answer him.
When looking at the next round, a wicketkeeper is generally expected to top middle order batsman, and hence that is what we will see in the future. All Colts are required to have two skills they're strong in. Yeah, I mean, you're encouraged to. In fact, Tush's son is a wicketkeeper batsman, and he should keep up the other skill. You're encouraged to do that. So I hope that doesn't come at the cost of diluting the effort you put into one of the skills, but naturally it is. But it doesn't apply to specialist batsmen. You don't expect, no one's going to ask, the likes of Graham Thorpe to turn his arm over, or Robin Smith, or David Gow. They're not going to ever bother about bowling, because you always have to bat, and there's 5 or 6 other bowlers in the side, but it doesn't work like that with batting. So yeah, the ones who aren't specialist batsmen do, in the lower order, have to apply themselves a little bit more than the batsman. Moeen Ali is a case and example. You've forced a bowler to bat. You haven't asked the opening batsman to pick up off spin, but you've made Moeen Ali, who's recently retired, who's an off-spin bowler, you've said, look, you now have to practice your batting, because you may be opening soon, and you did, and you will, and he has.
Well, they ruined him. I mean, I'm not a fan of Moeen Ali. I won't go into this now too much now, but that whole idea of having to have 2 strings to your bow, 3 strings to your bow, it ruined Moeen Ali. But that's down to management more than anything else, and how they handled him. I think it's so competitive now. Like Tush is finding out when it's obviously his son that, like he's saying here, all Colts are required to have 2 skills that you're strong in. You can't just, unless you're Shane Warne or Glenn McGraw or something, of one, elements of the game. Then unless you're that good, you have to have maybe 2 facets to your game. You're strong in 2 suits, So yeah, but as you know, I remember as we were all growing up, isn't it, Rajiv? Everyone was an all-rounder. Remember you asked a kid who you trained with, well, what'd you do? Yeah, I do a bit of both. Everyone did a bit of both. You very rarely heard someone say, "No, I bowl, I bat." It's I bat and bowl. It was always the way. Everyone had to be bloody Ian Botham. I remember growing up in school cricket.
Of course, yeah. Botham was, we probably saw the tail end of him, so he didn't capture our imaginations as much. But yeah, probably the generation just before us. But yeah, no, it's and Alex Stewart became that new type of all-rounder.
Exactly,
wicket-keeping all-rounder. And I wrote a letter about that in 2002. Wow, would you believe it? It's been that long. One of my early letters when I was a youngster. And I mentioned, that we've got, in the 90s, saw that shift from that sort of bowling or batting all-rounder, Botham, Kapil Dev, Imran Khan, that finished in the 80s. In the 90s, we saw Andy Flower, Sangakkara, Gilchrist, towards the end, Alex Stewart, the new generation of wicket-keeping all-rounders. So, and it's, that's the way it is. So, yeah, but it's just an interesting thing to end on. Alex Stewart, the number of runs he scored in Test cricket is his birthday. So it's 8,463, 8th of April, 1963. He scored 8,463 runs. He left it on his birthday. He ended up as the second highest run scorer. He didn't get to top behind Graham Gooch and just above David Gower. Now he's probably, with Joe Root, I think he's been shifted down to about 3 or 4, I think. I'm not sure. So,
I was looking at the stats before and seeing actually that regards to the ODI cricket, you would have thought that just the way they both played, that Alex Stewart would have a much better record than Allerton. It wasn't that way, though, was it?
No,
it wasn't that way at all. Alex Stewart averaged 31.6 in 170 matches, and then Mike Allerton averaged 35.12. Only played 54 matches. Obviously, played much less than the third. And
also, you've got to remember, I'm not 100% sure on this, but Alex Stewart would not have opened for all of those. So if you're not opening, your average is going to fall. So even a great like Alan Border or David Gower, they only average just above 30. Steve Waugh above 30 because Mark Waugh averages.
Rules difference come and finish at the end of something. Rules completely different. Yeah.
So Mark Waugh, who opened, averaged probably 44 or something. His brother Steve, because he's batting at 5 and 6, is going to be averaging 30. Which is so ODI stats, you've always got to take it with a pinch of salt.
Fair point. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And much more sample size as well.
54 innings.
54. Yeah, that's it. So, cool. I think we'll leave it there, Rajiv.
Brilliant. Yeah.
It's good stuff, and I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Always good to hear, the information. I mean, you full information, Rajiv, comes to the 90s. It's brilliant. Honestly, some of the stuff I know half the stuff you mentioned today, so it's great.
Speaking of which, if you want, on completely nothing to do with cricket, I've got a huge interest in organised crime in terms of the mafia history. So if you ever want to do a podcast on mafia and stuff, please come to me.
I'll remember that actually. Yeah, there's actually a channel I watch called Valuetainment. It's got Patrick Bet David, and he's always got like ex-mafia people on his like Michael Franzese. Yeah. On his channel.
He's an ex-mafia, and there's probably a hit out on him because he's revealing all the bloody secrets. So he was part of one of the 5 families in New York, and he's a born-again religious guy, I think Christian, and he's going around talking about the ills of being part of the mafia. But he earned a lot of money on a scam on petrol stations, but I won't talk about it now because we're talking about cricket here. But Michael Franzese,
Michael Franzese, I think the Valuetainment have got like Patrick Bet David's got this trailer out at the moment for a movie he's made with these guys. And it's called like United Mafia of America or something like that. I can't remember, but it's he's big on that stuff. Anyway, cool. All right, maybe if pivot in the future from cricket, go on to organised crime and everything. I'll definitely get you on, Rajiv.
Put me in touch with your contact, and I can be one of the guests there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the usual suspects. So anyway, cool. All right, Rajiv. Thanks very much again. See you next month. Obviously, we've got a show planned on the Duncan Fletcher years. So next month. And I will catch up with you then. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thanks, mate.
Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.